the year 1378, a French knight named Marguerite de Carrouges made an accusation so shocking that it would forever change the course of medieval justice. She claimed that her husband's former best friend had brutally assaulted her in her own home. But here's the twist that makes this story absolutely mind-blowing. When the courts couldn't decide who was telling the truth, they ordered something that sounds like it came straight out of a fantasy novel. 2 armored knights would fight to the death in front of thousands of spectators, and whoever died would prove their case was false. This is the last legally sanctioned trial by combat in French history, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. If Marguerite's champion lost, she would be burned alive as a liar. Welcome to one of the most incredible true crime stories from medieval France, where honor, justice, and survival collided in the most dramatic way possible. This case has everything: betrayal between best friends, a brave woman risking everything for justice, political intrigue, and a finale that had an entire nation holding its breath. Let me take you back to 14th century Normandy, where our story begins with 3 people whose lives would become forever intertwined in tragedy. Jean de Carrouges was a respected knight and minor nobleman who had served faithfully in various military campaigns. His wife Marguerite was young, intelligent, and came from a respectable family. Then there was Jacques Le Gris, a charismatic squire who had worked his way up through the ranks to become a trusted friend of Jean's, and a favorite of the powerful Count Pierre d'Alençon. The friendship between Jean and Jacques started strong, but cracks began to appear when Jacques received preferential treatment from Count Pierre. Jean watched as his former friend was granted lands and positions that he felt should have been his. The breaking point came when Jacques was awarded a piece of property that Jean believed rightfully belonged to him. Their relationship soured completely, transforming from brotherhood into bitter rivalry. But the personal became absolutely catastrophic on a winter day in January 1386. Jean had left his castle at Cap-Mesnil to travel to Paris on business, leaving Marguerite alone with the servants. According to Marguerite's later testimony, Jacques Le Gris arrived at the castle under the pretense of visiting. What happened next would spark one of the most famous legal battles in medieval history. Marguerite claimed that Jacques forced his way into her chambers and violently assaulted her. She fought back as best she could, but Jacques was a trained warrior and overpowered her. After the attack, he allegedly threatened her, saying that no one would believe her word against his, especially given his favor with Count Pierre. But Jacques had underestimated Marguerite's courage and determination. When Jean returned from Paris, Marguerite immediately told him what had happened. Now, in medieval France, this wasn't just a personal matter. An assault on a nobleman's wife was considered an attack on the man's honor and property. Jean was faced with a terrible choice. He could remain silent and live with the shame, or he could pursue justice through the courts, knowing that the consequences could be deadly for everyone involved. Jean chose to fight. He formally accused Jacques Le Gris of the crime, but here's where the story gets even more complex. Jacques vehemently denied the charges, and he had powerful allies. Count Pierre supported Jacques, and many in the court believed his version of events. The case went before the Parliament of Paris, the highest court in France, but they couldn't reach a definitive verdict. This is where medieval justice took a turn that seems almost unbelievable to modern minds. When the courts couldn't determine the truth through testimony and evidence, they turned to what they believed was divine judgment. King Charles VI authorized a trial by combat, based on the medieval belief that God would ensure the righteous party would prevail in battle. The terms were set with terrifying clarity. Jean de Carrouges would fight Jacques Le Gris in single combat. If Jean won, it would prove Jacques was guilty, and justice would be served. But if Jacques won, it would mean that Marguerite had lied about the assault, and she would be burned alive as punishment for bearing false witness. The pressure on this young woman was unimaginable. The combat was scheduled for December 29th, 1386, at the Abbey of Saint-Martin-des-Champs in Paris. Word spread throughout France, and thousands of spectators gathered to witness this extraordinary event. Even the royal court attended, with King Charles VI and Queen Isabeau presiding over the proceedings. On the day of the combat, both knights appeared in full armor, mounted on horseback, and armed with lances, swords, and daggers. The ritual began with formal declarations of their positions. Jacques maintained his innocence, while Jean fought not just for his own honor, but for his wife's life and reputation. The battle itself was brutal and decisive. The two former friends charged at each other with lances, but the initial passes didn't produce a clear victor. They continued fighting with swords and then daggers in close combat. Finally, Jean de Carrouges managed to knock Jacques from his horse and deliver a fatal wound. As Jacques Le Gris lay dying, Jean demanded that he confess his guilt, but Jacques maintained his innocence until his final breath. The immediate aftermath was dramatic. The crowd erupted in cheers and gasps as they witnessed what they believed was God's judgment. Marguerite was vindicated, her life saved by her husband's victory. Jean was celebrated as a hero who had defended his wife's honor and proven her truthfulness through divine combat. But the story doesn't end there. Jacques Le Gris's property was confiscated, and his family suffered the consequences of his alleged crime. Jean de Carrouges was rewarded by the king and went on to serve in military campaigns, eventually dying in battle at the Siege of Azincourt in 1415. Marguerite lived for many more years, having survived one of the most public and dangerous ordeals any woman could face in medieval times. This case represents the last time trial by combat was used in France to resolve a criminal matter. It marked the end of an era where physical prowess was considered a valid method of determining legal truth. The story has fascinated historians, writers, and filmmakers for centuries because it combines so many elements that seem almost fictional. Friendship betrayed, honor defended, a woman's courage in the face of death, and a system of justice that we can barely comprehend today. What makes this case particularly compelling is how it illuminates the dangerous position of women in medieval society, where their word carried little weight without male protection, yet shows how one woman's bravery could change everything when she refused to be silenced.
Well, that was another inspiring tale from humanity's greatest hits. And by greatest, I mean deeply concerning. If you enjoyed watching the past embarrass itself, go ahead and subscribe. It won't make history less stupid, but at least you'll be emotionally prepared. This has been Sick of History, where the past comes to disappoint you weekly.